What if the person you trusted most in your own family was the one who quietly destroyed everything you believed was sacred? What if the desire to create life became the reason a family collapsed into silence, shame, and irreversible loss? This isn't a tale of love. It's not about sacrifice either. This is a story about desperation crossing a line. The line should never have been crossed, and once it was, there was no turning back. Stick with me till the end. What happens next is not just shocking, it's profoundly human and all too real. At first, everything seemed just fine, quiet house, nothing out of the ordinary. A familiar routine, a family that appeared stable from the outside. Gerard was a dedicated worker and a loving husband, a son who carried the weight of expectations. Sally was gentle, soft-spoken, and always kind, carrying a smile that hid a growing ache. And then there was the father, a widower, a man who had lost the love of his life, and believed that a grandchild was the last proof that his bloodline would survive. He often talked about family and what legacy really means, about how children give meaning to the years that follow loss. At first, it felt innocent, even a bit sweet, but repetition has a way of turning hope into pressure, and pressure has a way of cracking people from the inside each month. The silence felt thicker and more suffocating. Dr. Viz's whispered talks and silent wishes. Every negative result landed like a quiet funeral. No tears, no shouts, just a heavy silence in the air. Sally felt it most. Every time someone brought up babies or she spotted a stroller, it stung. Each time she heard laughter that was not meant for her, she blamed herself. Gerard kept his chin up, even when no one spoke it. He told her it was fine that they had time. Love was supposed to be enough, but it can't silence longing or erase fear. The father watched it all from a distance, too close to step in, too close to stay out. Loneliness had sharpened his thoughts, grief had blurred his judgment. He started to feel like fate was against him, like life had already taken too much. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, a dangerous idea took shape. Not as evil, not as lust, he told himself. It was all for family, for love, for their future. That is how every tragedy begins. Not with cruelty, but with a reason. When the truth about Gerard's condition surfaced, it wasn't said out loud. It was just whispered behind closed doors. The doctor, an old friend, a man who believed he was protecting hearts by hiding reality, just one conversation, one hidden truth, and everything changed forever. Sally learned what Gerard did not know. The window was closing fast. Time was slipping away. That the dream she held on to might never arrive, the weight felt unbearable. She was caught between loyalty and desire, between marriage and motherhood, between love and loss, where desperation meets vulnerability. The unthinkable can suddenly sound reasonable. The father saw the fracture. He didn't hold back. He stepped forward and spoke softly, gently, with the voice of someone who had already convinced himself he didn't see it as betrayal. He viewed it as a responsibility, a way out, a sacrifice, a secret that would save everyone. He promised. No one would know, that Gerard would be spared pain, that the child would be loved. And Sally was just exhausted, broken, desperate. Listened. This is where everything shifts. Not with a scream, not with violence, but through a quiet agreement that should have never happened. A decision made in silence that would haunt them forever. Because life born from lies never stays hidden. Truth always finds its way back. And when it does, it takes everything with it. If this story already feels heavy, if this feels a bit off, just bear with me. We're only getting started. In the next part, the secret grows and the lie deepens, and the cost becomes impossible to ignore. The secret didn't crash in. It crept in softly, wrapped in comfort. shielded by quiet. Days slipped by, then weeks. Nothing seemed off at first glance, but everything was different. Sally carried the burden alone, waking each morning with a tight knot in her chest. Each night she lay awake, listening to the house. Breathed the father watched over her, always calm and reassuring, talking about destiny, of how history would thank them, of how sometimes the hardest choices were the most necessary. He told her it wasn't betrayal. It was love, plain and simple. But when doubt crept in, he buried it beneath certainty. Gerard sensed the distance before he grasped the truth. Sally became quieter, more distracted. Her eyes no longer met his with the same ease. He assumed stress. Maybe it was just life throwing them another curveball, right? That's the risk with trust. It blinds you to what you never believed could happen. The father was always there, supportive, understanding, and totally present. He listened to Gerard talk about hope and nodded as he mentioned faith, all while hiding the truth. Not because he feared exposure, but because he believed silence was mercy. Then the moment arrived, the moment Sally had both dreamed of and dreaded. The test confirmed what she already knew. Her body had changed. Life had begun. Her hands trembled as she stared at the result, not from joy, but from the weight of what it meant. She was pregnant. But that miracle came with a shadow. And the father smiled when she shared the news. Not the smile of a grandfather, but the smile of a man who believed his plan had worked. This is all for the family, for our future together. For love, but love built on lies never stays hidden. Gerard found out by accident. The harshest truths always come out like this. A slip, a pause, a look held too long. The silence in the room changed, and suddenly the air felt dangerous. He confronted her gently at first, then urgently. The words tumbled out, broken and desperate, filled with confusion. And when she finally spoke, when the truth surfaced, the world Gerard knew collapsed in a single breath. The betrayal was not only romantic, it was existential. His wife, his father, the two people who defined safety, had rewritten reality without him. Anger followed shock, then disbelief, then grief. The father tried to justify, tried to minimize, tried to explain. He spoke of outcomes, of success, of results, but Gerard only heard loss of trust, loss of identity, loss of family. In that moment, he was no longer a husband, no longer a son. He was an outsider in his own life. The pregnancy did not bring joy. It brought division. Every heartbeat inside Sally became a reminder not of hope, but of the cost of deception. The house that once held warmth now held tension. Every meal, every glance, every silence thick with regret. And yet the secret was no longer theirs alone. Because truth has a way of demanding witnesses, and what comes next will turn private betrayal into irreversible consequence. If this part unsettled you, if it made you uncomfortable, that is because the next part reveals the consequences, not just emotional, but legal, moral, and irreversible. Once the truth is out, there's no taking it back. Words definitely have weight, right? But the truth, it has gravity that pulls you in. It pulls everything down with it. Gerard didn't leave right away. He was frozen in shock. Like someone standing in the ruins of a collapsed building, unsure which direction still existed. He stared at the man who raised him, searching for something familiar, anything that resembled the father he trusted, but the face in front of him felt foreign. The explanations came quickly, way too quickly. The father tried to explain himself. He talked about intention and sacrifice, but it all felt off. Like he was trying to justify He convinced himself he was just fixing things. Like a hero, not a villain. He kept saying that love made it all okay. That family mattered. And bloodlines had to carry on, no matter what. But Jared could not hear philosophy, only betrayal. Sally cried, but it wasn't loud or dramatic. Just quiet, her tears. were quiet. Feeling ashamed and utterly exhausted, she struggled to explain her desperation and loneliness. The pressure she felt every day from expectations she'd never asked for. She said she felt stuck, torn between what she wanted and her loyalty. But betrayal doesn't get any easier to swallow just because you try to explain it. It only becomes clearer. The house turned cold, like a shadow creeping in. Not in temperature, but in presence. The walls that once echoed with routine now felt heavy and hollow, like they were holding their breath. Now absorbed silence. Gerard crashed on the couch, and then he just stopped sleeping altogether. Every thought kept looping back like a broken record. How long? How often? Who knew? Questions that had no answers that could heal just kept swirling in his mind. He replayed memories. Conversations that now felt like echoes of a life he once knew. Moments that once felt normal, now poisoned with suspicion. He remembered the looks that said it all. The pauses, those heavy moments that stretched on forever. The way his father always seemed to know too much. Like he was reading Gerard's mind or something. What hurt most was not the act, but the planning. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a choice. A choice made over and over again. That realization shattered something permanent. When Gerard finally left, he did not slam doors, he did not shout. He simply walked out with the quiet understanding that nothing behind him felt like it was his anymore. Legal stuff hit right after all those emotions. Divorce papers were filed, not in anger, but out of need. But out of necessity. The law does not care about intention, only responsibility. Gerard discovered that betrayal didn't set him free from obligation. It tied him to it even more tightly. The system saw facts, not feelings. He was legally tied to a situation. He never consented to. The father believed control would protect him. That silence was supposed to hold everything together. But he totally underestimated how exposure would tear it all apart. People notice when families fracture, when patterns break, when stories stop lining up. Whispers start to spread. It's wild. Then it got louder. What started as a private collapse quickly turned into public scrutiny. Friends withdrew, neighbors whispered. The father stood defiant, claiming misunderstanding. Claiming people judged what they could not understand. Justification only made things worse. Sally just vanished from her friends and social circles. Her pregnancy, visible. Her story, invisible. She felt both victim and participant, loved and condemned, protected and abandoned. Guilt settled in layers, heavy, relentless. She questioned every choice, every moment. She had convinced herself this was right. Now she understood there was no version of this would everyone survive intact. The child grew, completely unaware and untouched by anyone's intentions, yet carrying the consequences of decisions made before existence. Gerard moved cities, not to escape responsibility, but to escape reminders. He rebuilt, step by step. But trust was hard to find. But clarity returned. He understood. Now their love without boundaries becomes harm. Desire without ethics leads to destruction. And that's the father, the man who once preached values, lost everything he claimed to protect: respect, connection, legacy. These are the real treasures. What he preserved biologically, erect relationships. Because legacy isn't just about blood ties. It's all about behavior, The damage done here will echo way longer than any name ever could. The final part of this story is not about punishment. It's all about facing the truth, Not in a legal sense, but in a deeply human way. Time did not soften the truth. It sharpened it. Days passed, then weeks, then months, and what once felt like shock evolved into something heavier. Acceptance, not forgiveness, not peace, Just the understanding that this was now reality. Gerard tried to build distance. But distance does not erase memory. Every milestone, every holiday, every quiet moment carried the echo of what had been lost. He wrestled with anger, but anger eventually burns itself out. What remained was grief, not only for the marriage, but for the family he believed he had. He grieved the father. He thought he knew the values. He trusted the foundation he stood on. Because betrayal from a stranger wounds, but betrayal from blood rewrites your understanding of the world. Sally lived inside contradiction. She loved the child growing inside her with a depth that surprised even herself. Yet that love was entangled with shame, fear, and regret. She avoided mirrors, avoided conversations, avoided questions she could not answer. Honestly, her body carried life, but her mind carried weight. She wondered constantly if motherhood would redeem her, or forever remind her. The father leaned into control. He structured everything, schedules, rules, explanations, as if order could overwrite damage. He spoke of responsibility, sure thing. Here's a more engaging version. It's about stepping up, taking action when others are too weak to do it. But authority without humility becomes tyranny, and his refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing created a deeper fracture. People don't really need perfection. They just crave truth. And he offered none. The child was born into silence. No celebration. No gathered family around. No shared joy to celebrate, just a heavy sense of obligation hanging in the air. The world saw a newborn, but the people closest saw a reminder Gerard didn't show up, not because he was mean, but because he had to look out for himself. He knew that being there would shatter him. It hit him hard. Protecting yourself isn't the same as walking away. It is boundary. Legal arrangements were finalized. Cold clinical language stripped of emotion. Words like custody, responsibility, and support, they carry weight, right? They shape lives, influence choices, and impact everyone involved. None of them addressed the heart. They only maintained structure. Sally struggled with isolation. Motherhood is difficult, even in the best conditions, and hers were anything but. She loved fiercely, yet felt alone. The father remained present, but his presence felt transactional, protective, yes, comforting, no, because love rooted in control cannot nurture freedom. The child grew innocent, curious, unaware of the story surrounding existence. But children sense tension. Even when words are hidden, they absorb silence, tone absent. And absence speaks loudly. Gerard rebuilt slowly. He found strength not in forgetting, but in redefining. He learned that family is not entitlement, it is behavior. That loyalty is not obligation, it is choice. And that walking away from toxicity is not weakness, it is clarity. The father aged faster than expected. Isolation has a way of accelerating time, friends. Vanished, trust evaporated. And in quiet moments, when justification failed, he felt it lost. Not the loss of reputation, but the loss of relationship. The one thing control cannot replace. And this is where the story pauses before its final understanding, because consequences do not end with events. They grow up, They share lessons. They linger in your mind. And they totally change you. Time rolled on, And the story didn't just fade away, it settled in like dust that never fully clears. Like a scar that stops bleeding but never fades. The child grew totally unaware of the full truth, right? Just surrounded by explanations that skirt around the real issues. It's like stories are all edited for comfort, But deep down, we all crave something more genuine. Details softened for survival, but truth has gravity. It does not rush, it waits. Gerard built a life far from the wreckage. It's not perfect, but hey, it's definitely got its charm, right? But honestly, learn to sit with discomfort, to forgive without reconnecting, to release anger without rewriting reality. Forgiveness doesn't mean you have to be best buddies again. It's all about picking peace instead of getting stuck in that obsession. He understood something profound, that some people do not betray you out of hatred, they betray you out of entitlement. And entitlement disguised as sacrifice is still exploitation. Sally aged with questions. Motherhood gave her purpose, but never really set her free. She loved her child fiercely, protectively, yet deep down she wondered, would love really be enough if the truth ever came out? Because children grow and questions mature, and silence eventually collapses under its own weight. The father lived surrounded by justification. He told himself he saved the family, preserved the bloodline, did what had to be done, but justification cannot replace connection. Power cannot replace. Love control cannot replace trust, and in quiet moments when there was no one left to convince, he felt it. That heavy weight of regret, not for what he did, but for the price he paid. Because the highest price of betrayal is not punishment, it is isolation. This story is not about scandal or shock, it is about desperation, about how fear can corrupt values, how longing can override boundaries, how silence can be mistaken for solution. It is a warning that not every problem can be fixed, that not every desire deserves fulfillment, and that crossing lines in the name of love destroys the very thing love needs to survive. If this story unsettles you, it should, because it forces a question we often avoid. What would you never sacrifice, no matter how badly you wanted the outcome? Values are tested, not when things are easy, but when desire whispers just this once. And the final truth is this: some secrets do not protect families, they erase them. If this story moved you, subscribe not for drama but for truth, because stories like this are not rare, they are just rarely spoken. And if you want to continue exploring the hidden consequences of human decisions, watch the next story, because understanding begins where comfort ends.